cut a zero off and send to a girlfriend, or eat rats and starve. That's something new. In ancient Athens, if you were a good enough artist, you got free room and board in the town hall for the rest of your life. And the town hall was right in the middle of town, not out in nowhere. We have taken our notion of art and reduced it to, maybe a kind of soporific or a kind of aspirin to relieve the sufferings of real life. She takes it much more seriously than that. She said, "It is very odd that we do not today have a Christian aesthetic, a Christian philosophy of the arts." And her call for that and her realization that this is very important is an early version of something that many others have seen, von Balthasar, for instance, or Solzhenitsyn. There's a lot of things I could say about this. Let me just say one thing. She starts by taking Plato very seriously. If you read the Church Fathers, you will be shocked by the fact that they take quite seriously the thing that almost every modern reader dislikes in Plato, namely his attitude towards the arts of the Republic. It's very sensorial and apparently very Puritan. Artists are not allowed in the state unless they're moralistic artists. Realistic artists are not allowed. They're harmful. But she tries to rehabilitate, or half-rehabilitate Plato, not for the sake of historical accuracy or even for the sake of Plato, but for a deeper purpose, as we'll see in a moment. She says, what Plato is really concerned to banish from his perfect state is the kind of art which aims at mere entertainment, which he saw as art that dissipates energy instead of directing it into some good and useful channel. Plato is concerned with the moral and human effect of art. So far, so good. Plato lived at the beginning of the era which saw the collapse and corruption of the great Greek civilization. Plato saw the rot beginning to settle in and cried out like a prophet to his people to repent while there is yet time. He saw that the theater audience was in fact looking to the theater for nothing but amusement and entertainment, frittering themselves away. Well, there is an ominous likeness between the decadence of Plato's age and that of ours. It may be well for us to remember Plato's warning. If you receive the pleasure-seasoned muse, pleasure will be the king in your city instead of law and principle. The remedy Plato proposes is first to get rid of representational art, which he hoped would take away the frittering pleasure and entertainment, and then to introduce a kind of moralistic art, which is sort of a social propaganda, which is, of course, what the fascists and communists and all totalitarians have tried to do. So he got part of the problem right, but he didn't get the solution right. The fundamental mistake here is a division of art into only two different kinds. First, entertainment art, which dissipates the energies of the audience and pours them down the drain, and then the other kind of art, which canalizes energy into a sort of mill stream to turn the wheel of social action. What's missing? A third category, the most important one of all. Where did that come from? It came from Christian dogma. Huh? The idea of art as creation is the single most important contribution that Christianity has made to aesthetics. Unfortunately, we are apt to use the words creation and creativeness very vaguely and loosely because we do not relate them properly to their theological basis. But it is significant that the Greeks did not have this word in their aesthetic at all. They looked on a work of art as either divine inspiration or a kind of human technology, a manufacture. Neither, for that matter, was the word creation in their theology, or in their language. It's significant that the word for create, barach in Hebrew, does not exist in any other ancient language. The verb barach has only one noun that you can put with it, God. No matter how creative a man is, only God can create something out of nothing, materially. We cannot create matter out of nothing. But since we are made in the image of the Creator, we too are what Tolkien calls sub-creators. We create thought, we create fiction, we create art. Because the Greeks did not have the idea of creation out of nothing, they didn't have the idea of creativity in art. When the first biblical philosopher, Philo of Judea, went to Athens in the 1st century and studied at Plato's Academy and interacted with the Greek philosophers there, many of them thought that he was very wise because of his notion of God. There's only one God, he's supreme, he's perfect, he's eternal, he knows everything. Well, you know, Plato came close to that too, and even in a sort of way Aristotle. But then, what he said, and this God created the entire material universe out of absolutely nothing. They thought, now we know you're insane. That's impossible. That's simply impossible. A radically new idea. And its image in the arts is a radically new aesthetic, which we have yet to catch up to. A real Christian aesthetic must be based on dogma, not on sociology or on ethics. The Jews were forbidden to make any image for worship because before the revelation of the threefold unity in which image and unimaginable are one, it was fatally easy to substitute the idol for the image. The Christian revelation set free all the images by showing that the true image subsisted within the Godhead itself. Well, that's a very short, single-sentence statement of an incredibly pregnant theological idea that will transform aesthetics. And she hasn't said by any means the last word about it, but she said the first word, and somebody should say a little more. If you're really ambitious, the person to read is von Balthasar, who's profound, but he's German, and therefore almost unreadable. Somebody said of Hegel, the most notoriously unreadable philosopher ever, somebody should first translate him into German. But to get profundity and clarity at the same time, you need somebody like C.S. Lewis, and that's remarkable. You don't usually get that. Well, I've given you 9 big ideas, and it's taken almost an hour, so I will now give myself the hook and give you time to ask questions.
You mentioned Sayers as an inkling. Why is she often not listed as one of that company?
Oh, because she didn't usually attend their meetings. She was very friendly with all of them, and they admired her and thought very highly of her. And there was no falling out, but I'm not sure why. I don't think there were male chauvinists. She was the only woman who was part of the inner circle. But Lewis, Tolkien, and Charles Williams, while he lived, were the center of it. And then there were a few others like Dyson that attended most of the meetings, and she came occasionally. I'm not sure why. She was, by the way, very eccentric. She smoked cigars, she wore strange-looking clothes, and they loved her. I think the reason Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman was that her personality was so similar to Dorothy Sayers. She was tough.
Please explain the sacramental view of work. I didn't quite understand it when you were talking about Sayers' critique of Rand's Fountainhead.
Sacramental view of work is basically to see work as a sacred thing. That is, to see secular work as sacred. To drill holes in the wall between the secular and the sacred. A sacrament, literally, is a means of grace. Work can be a means of grace. Instituted by Christ. Well, work has been instituted by the mind of God, who is Christ. Christ is in Genesis. And something that is not a mere sign, but also an effective sign, that which actually does what it points to. So it's both a thing that does work, a real cause, and also a sign of the thing that's being done. And work is that. What is work? Well, work is producing things, goods and services that weren't there before. So work is creative. But only by creative work do you become a creator. In that way, work actually produces the creativity that is in it. It, in a sense, creates itself. The opposite is the kind of Cartesian dualistic view of work. Here, you are a mind, a pure spirit, and you want knowledge, and you want pleasure, and you want all sorts of experiences, and you live in a physical world. So you want to transform that physical world into a world that will give you more knowledge, more power, more pleasure. So you, in your will and mind, command your body to do X work and bring A to B, because B brings you more pleasure than A. That's the non-sacramental view of work, the purely technical view of work.
I understand Sayre's chapter on finding a calling that each individual is designed for and can fully devote one's life. However, it still seems that many jobs in life just have to be done as a discipline, perhaps, and learned enjoyment. Some children don't care for math or learning to play an instrument. Some homemakers would like to skip the ironing and the business and meetings. Are the lines perhaps not always black and white?
Yes, but there is a fairly black and white line between natural work and unnatural work. Not all work is fun, not all work is easy. In fact, most work is not easy. And not all work is something that we all have an equal aptitude for. As you say, some kids don't like math. Most people don't like ironing. Most people find it rather boring to peel potatoes. But those are natural works, and they discipline the human spirit. And they're a kind of prayer. Remember, ora et labora, prayer and work, the two parts of life together. However, most work that most Americans do most of the time today is not unnatural work. Studying math so that you can calculate what chemical reactions can best propel a rocket from a rocket launcher to take down an enemy plane. That's natural work. Because a plane is an extension of the bird-like nature or aspirations of the human spirit, and war is natural, although there's a lot of evil in it, and math is natural. Nothing unnatural there. However, figuring out how you can, even in an ethical way, manage an economic takeover of another company simply so that you can make more money for whatever you want to use it for. There's nothing natural there. It's purely artificial. Insofar as the artificial is an extension of the natural or a servant of the natural, it participates in a natural work. Insofar as it exists for its own sake, it's alienated from it. That's probably the most important truth in Marxism. There's a lot of nonsense in Marxism, and Marx was a thoroughly confused and evil human being, but the critique of the alienation of the worker from his work in capitalist society is something that Sayers, following G.K. Chesterton and Belloc's distributism, took very seriously and agreed with. Now, what you can do about it, what's the solution? How to transform the system? Nobody's got a good answer to that. Distributism is a beautiful notion of back to nature, and small is beautiful. But how do you go from here to there, except in small groups? I don't know. I'm an economic idiot. I don't even balance my checkbook.
Contemporary culture imagines that it is pursuing pure creation or creativity and producing a great deal of ugliness. Is this ugliness art as creation or something else? How do we distinguish what is beautiful in art?
I don't think you can create ugliness. I think ugliness is a lack of creation. Just as moral evil is not a thing, it doesn't have an ontological substance as moral good does. So I don't think aesthetic ugliness has a kind of substance over here against aesthetic beauty over there, as if beauty is a white cloud and ugliness is a dark cloud. There is a beauty in so-called ugliness, dark clouds, and you need the dark to set off the light. But if you truly create it, then it's real, it's being, it has being, and all being has beauty.
Could you suggest ways to awaken our stony hearts to the wonder that is reality?
The Inklings.
Practical awareness.
Come to conferences like this.
That is the last question that was submitted via email. Someone have a question?
Can you speculate as to why so little of worth seems to have been written on the subject of Christian aesthetics?
Because I think largely of the sociological situation that we are in which the Christian community is very suspicious of aesthetes. They think they are inherently decadent and dissipated. There are two professions that, from the beginning apparently, from classical times, have been viewed with great suspicion by religious people and moralists. One of them is the theater. The other is lawyers. Even Shakespeare said, first we'll kill all the lawyers. Well, I don't want to get into that. Don't tempt me to tell some of my favorite lawyer jokes. But why has the theater, the arts, been always viewed with suspicion? And why has there been this natural tension, if not alienation, between moral and religious people on the one hand and people devoted to beauty on the other hand? Well, I suppose it's partly because beauty is so profoundly interesting and powerful and almost magical. You have no defense against it. Somebody comes up with a really stupid and destructive idea. If you have any sort of a mind at all, you can combat it. Think of the idea as a soldier on a horse, and you're in a castle, and there's a drawbridge, and you let down the drawbridge for all friends but not enemies. And the soldier on the horse says, I am your friend. And you say, oh yeah, prove it. What's the password? And you argue with him. And you see that he's the enemy, so you don't let down the drawbridge. You don't believe that idea. Or a soldier on a horse comes in and says, I'm good for you. I can make you better. You should be like this. And you say, well, I have a thing called a conscience, and that's an aspect of my reason. I'll argue with you. And I'll use my conscience to evaluate you. And you might say, no, you don't let down the drawbridge. But somebody beautiful comes on a horse, and he's not on a horse. Where is he? He's in the rain. He falls down from the sky, and he fills the moat, and the moat overflows. There's so much rain there. And the overflow of the moat seeps under the walls of the castle. You can do nothing about it. And that weakens the foundation, and the walls fall down, and the rain comes in. There is no defense against beauty. That's why we're afraid of it. But that's precisely why we have to cultivate it. What a profound power we have. You cannot resist beauty. Remember that story I told you about St. Patrick's Cathedral? The first truly beautiful thing that struck me. How can such a wicked and horrible thing called the Catholic Church, the whore of Babylon, be so beautiful? I told you what I'll tell these people. Three profound persons, and I know, two of them philosophers, one of them a very pious and rather mystical Benedictine monk, have told me at various times in their lives, not copying from each other, that they were once atheists, and the argument that refuted their atheism and made it impossible for them to doubt that there was a God was the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. The most beautiful thing we've seen to connect these two alienated worlds now, the world of morality and the world of art, the most beautiful thing we've ever seen in this world is Jesus Christ. And The whole purpose of the church is to be a Christ-making machine, to make little Christ, to make saints, to turn us all into saints. And when you find somebody like Mother Teresa, you can't argue with her. You have to be very, very wicked to argue with Mother Teresa. I mean, Christopher Hitchens tries, but even he doesn't succeed. So, the very reason why we've shied away from art is precisely the reason we should do exactly the opposite. It's power. Wasn't it Solzhenitsyn who said if the world's going to be saved, it's going to be saved by beauty?
You spoke of Sayre's rebuttal of the postmodern notion that dogma in church is what keeps people away from church, and we all here can agree that it's the lack of dogma that's causing problems in the church. Can you expound on it?
I can, but I won't because Sayre's already did. But if you want me to, I guess. It's not totally true what Sayre says. Don't take it literally as a law with no exceptions. If you preach dogma, you will bring in much of the world that you wouldn't bring in otherwise, but you'll alienate some people. We all have a dogma. But the dogma that some people have is I hate dogma. And if a dogma gets dogma, they have an intolerance of intolerance. So yes, you will piss people off very seriously, as Jesus did. If you want to bore everybody and produce smiles and make everybody a Canadian, well then, whenever I go to Canada, I test this hypothesis. I deliberately insult my Canadian hosts, who are always very nice. And they always thank me for insulting them. And they apologize for being so apologetic.
Any other questions for Dr. Kreeft on Inklings or on philosophy?
A bit of a random rabbit hole, but you mentioned your distaste for a lot of Jesus fiction. Would you care to shed any commentary on the novel Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ?
Well, that's not Jesus fiction. Jesus is a character there, but he's in the background. You see him through Ben-Hur's eyes, not through the author's eyes. That works. That works very well. The contrast between that and the kind of thing Tim LaHaye or Frank Peretti puts out today is radical. Quo Vadis is another book where profoundly Christian, but Christ is not there as a character. You don't see his face. Yeah, I should modify myself. I certainly didn't mean to say you can't write profoundly Christian fiction, or you can't write historical fiction about Christ's day. Theophilus is a very good book by Michael O'Brien, one of the best Catholic novelists in the world today, if not the best. And it's about one of the characters in the Gospel, Theophilus, Luke's friend. It works. Good historical fiction. It's not a masterpiece, but it works. Something like that can be done, but you can't do with Jesus what you can do with anybody else, unless you do something like Lewis did. Don't talk about Earth, talk about Narnia, and don't make him a man, make him a lion. So you creep past what he calls the watchful dragons of familiarity and duty that stifle your spontaneous response and say to you, this is what you ought to feel, and thus make it impossible to feel. So Lewis tricks you. It's a good trick. But you can't write, I don't think you can write successful Jesus fiction without some trick like that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kreeft.
quick correction on the dates I gave you for next summer for this International Catholic Congress of Anglicans. It's July 13 through 17. July 13 through 17 at St. Andrew's Anglican Church in